Hello, everyone. Thank you. First and foremost, thanks for joining. And hello and welcome. Uh, it's fantastic to see so many future journalists, media professionals, as well as curious minds that have joined today. Thank you again for joining our workshop, Connecting the Dot, Global Plastic and the Media, which is organized and consumer group. I go into the just give a brief intro of CAG. CAG is a 30-year-old non-profit and professional organization dedicated to citizen rights, consumer and environmental issues by promoting governance process, including transparency, accountability, and decision making. Before we jump into the work, which is the plastic street journalism, let's quickly go over some housekeeping rules we have for the keep making the thing smoothly. First, the chat is you guys. Drop your question, your thoughts, but I would keep it professional. And also keep in mind we have three speakers for different sessions. Sessions are short and power packed. So grab your coffee, whatever, and you don't miss anything. And so, you can ask your questions in the chat, and also after the session we will have minutes of Q&A, so you can questions in chat and. And also, don't worry if you miss, we will also need the recording of meeting with another important materials and cooperation. So now on topic, which is we're all here. So look at plastic, which is once defined as a miracle material of our life, is everywhere. So you see in the outer environment, in our oceans, in our food chain, in the air we breathe, and also maybe even in the morning tea time. So while we agree that plastic pollution is a massive, also important, we tell this, it matters a lot how we tell this story. And to de plastic pollution, global countries came started this process for global plastic treaty, which is one of the most ambitious international agreement in the making. But also okay, treaty negotiation can sound long with heavy UN document that probably no one needs. Okay, that's where you as journalists, because your stories have the power to translate complex policy into complex narratives and to hold us accountable and make people care, importantly. But so keeping in mind, covering these international is not easy, because there is science, there is politics, there is economics, and also which is important thing in the climate right now is to make that occasional diplomatic drama which you have to maintain in your writings as well. So this is where this workshop is here to equip you with the right tools, techniques, and insights to cut through the whole noise and report effectively on this issue. To do this, we have amazing lineup of experts, journalists today, and I can promise you that by the end of this session, you will feel more confident in tackling plastics and policies in your reporting. So let's get started. So for the first, I would like to invite our first speaker, who is a seasoned journalist with nearly 2 decades of experience. Currently serving as a deputy director at The Hindu, he specializes in reporting on science, environment, and clean energy. With a background in electrical engineering from NIT Roorkela, he further honed his expertise with the Masters in Indian Studies from King's College, University of London. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jacob Koshi. Mr. Jacob Koshi, the floor is yours. And thank you so much for accepting the invitation and joining the workshop.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Vamsi, and I'm so happy to be able to speak to a very vibrant group of budding journalists and media professionals, and all of you, connected to this grave environmental issue regarding plastics. So, so today, actually, I hope there's you can't hear a lot of music around me. I think it's just stopped because actually it's Holi, in Delhi. I'm based out of Noida specifically. So I was just a little worried that a lot of the holy noise from all the dancing music would penetrate, but I think people are just they're broken for lunch break. But that's great for us. So that's why it's great that we can spend the next half an hour odd discussing this. So as Vamsi so graciously pointed out, I primarily write on science and environment, and because environment encompasses not only issues such as pollution, but it also I also write frequently on diplomatic aspects of of how countries treat various aspects of pollution. So there is, of course, the IPCC, the COP conferences, the Conference of Parties, which is all about greenhouse gases and their and their curbing and what countries have been doing. So that, of course, has a nearly 30-year history, and that is an entire subject in itself. But this is something relatively new. So I have covered the Conference of Parties, a couple of times, and I this last year was the first time that I actually managed to go to Busan in South Korea to cover the this the formation of the global plastic treaty, and it is still not yet a treaty, so this is still very, very early stages, but we will all discuss that. So what I would like to broadly, I've got a few slides, but I'd like to broadly frame this as first giving you a kind of flavor of what the global plastics treaty to be, a bit about its origin and genesis. What are the key issues that people are what that countries and their representatives face over there, and what really is the problem that that is being sought to address, to be addressed. Then after which I'll end the slides particularly, and we shall branch out to what was my experience as a journalist at at Busan. It was an 8-day conference, and finally I will give a sense of what is a kind of comparative sense of what it is to cover, what it was to have covered this plastic treaty versus the bigger Conference of Parties treaties, where they're talking, which is far more mature and at a different level of negotiations altogether. So let me just share my screen and. Okay, so first of all, let's just get to what is the crux of this problem. As Vamsi just briefly mentioned, plastic after the oil, or the oil industry is supposed to be one of the the greatest inventions of the human species per se, because number one, it was one of the first products that following the fossil fuel era, the discovery of fossil fuels, named and the uses of it in industry, particularly as oil and all its various distillates. You could, it was this one product that could be made into a variety of forms, and it has fueled the creation of the consumer society, the consumer world as we understand it now. There were, of course, nothing like plastic. Is it is number one, it is so malleable, it is so relatively affordable, it has got a easily duplicatable production process, and it can be used in a variety of formats. One of the main arguments for is that it has managed to equalize to some extent inequality. That is, rich countries and developed countries, consumers or their citizens, people over there, have access to a wide range of consumer products that those developing countries or poorer countries couldn't access. A major problem was the kind of materials they use, but plastic, because of its ubiquity and it's so widely available, somewhat bridges this problem. So great. So as a as an equalizer, it was a killer app, as call it. But the thing is, consumerization and industrialization is now widespread. It is like a basic living condition all across the world. And with it, because it is premised on plastic goods, plastic production has nearly doubled across the world in the last 2 decades. And most estimates, especially by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they say that if this rate continues, we could have at least triple the amount of plastics in millions of tons by 2060. Now, all this would have been great, except that plastic, as we all know, is something that does not biodegrade easily. It is something that remains in the soil and takes hundreds, sometimes even thousand, years to entirely disintegrate. It is something that is now polluting marine environments. I mean, the biggest concern against plastic has always been that because people dump it. I mean, it is just thrown away and discarded, and rarely enters into recycling chains. It starts out primarily as being an eyesore. It is the most visible aspect after black and fumes as a symbol of pollution, and most of it is dumped in it's just dumped everywhere or buried in landfills. And even in my city of Delhi, there are at least three huge structures. When I came to Delhi nearly 20 years ago, I saw, that I thought the Aravalis were much more north than Delhi, but I saw these huge mountains, and I thought, how did the Aravalis become so close? But then I went close and I realized that it was a huge mountain of this dump. It was a plastic dump, hundreds of feet high. So that's the scale, and there are many cities now which face this problem, especially as we are getting more and more urbanized. So this is the problem. Everybody is kind of globally now. For years we have all been everybody acknowledges that the volume of plastic is a major problem. So naturally, when something is like a global issue, you have the United Nations come along, and there is the historic United Nations Environmental Program. And since particularly 2017, the UNEP per se has been taking a very concerted stand as to getting different parties. First of all, it's European states per se. Now, as a group, the European bloc of countries is one group of countries that generally has taken problems of environment and ecology fairly seriously. I mean, even the whole thing about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, the problems with it, and getting countries to agree to, in evolving something like the IPCC, getting countries to even think of cutting greenhouse gas emissions. All of this has genesis in European countries and is mooted by the United Nations. Uh, Same thing with the ozone layer problem that is from hydrofluorocarbon gases. Again, it has its origin in UN led protocols. So the UN has now decided that, okay, now the next evil, not that the other evils have been solved, but we need to address this evil of plastic, and let us concertedly focus on ending plastics. So through a series of measures, which practically began in 2017, it has started running large campaigns. It has got together diplomats from various countries. It has made groupings of countries. I mean, like mine, there are different kinds of countries which have different diplomatic positions on how they on to the extent to which they see plastic as the problem. And since 2017, many countries have gradually been, uh, you know, it at different levels being made aware or committed to be taking action regarding plastic. So significantly, there was this ad hoc, open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics, and they concluded their work in November 2020. And finally, it was following this group's report presentations that they decided to take this matter to the fifth session of the UNEA, that is the United Nations Environmental uh, Environmental Assembly. I'm sorry. So they've had a series of meetings in 2022, and uh, in 2022 they made this major call that just as you have a convention, or you have the conference of parties that meet annually to address greenhouse gas emissions, we should have a similar process for for plastics, where nations detail what kind of actions they will take, what must be cut, what should we, how do we practically go about addressing plastic. And tying into this, there are previous conventions, like, for example, there is the Basel Convention and Rotterdam Conventions. These are all conventions, that have evolved a couple of decades ago. All of them are meant to regulate the movement of hazardous substances. It can involve pesticides or any kinds of chemicals that are known to are known to be an environmental threat. India is a signatory to all of these conventions. There's also the Stockholm Convention. So through all of these, chemicals are a regulated category, and even when certain and chemicals are graded, so there is an entire hierarchy of when chemicals are moved from one country to the other. What is the process by which recipient countries are informed of, uh, you know, what, how much quantity of these chemicals are coming in, etc. So, you know, so they've tried to make plastic also. The Basel Convention has a subsection on plastic waste management, and it is through this that this treaty started to be formed. And finally, in March 2022, you had this historic resolution where countries decided to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, because that is the one common source of concern, that our oceans are getting extraordinarily polluted, and we have to take steps to address not only just plastic pollution on land, but even on the sea. And it was following this that you had there were four different treaties following March 22. There were there were discussions held in in Canada and Africa, South America, and finally in Busan, where the chair of the party, I mean the UN appointed chair of the party, they evolve a text agreement. Now, in that text agreement, all countries will give in their various viewpoints on what should be done regarding plastic production. Should we think of cutting plastic production? Should countries be given targets that by this year we are going to be we will cut our production from X to Y? How do we go about actively measuring this? Should some countries pay other countries for taking on plastic cuts? Because if you remember, because plastic at all said and done is still the lifeblood of the industrial consumer economy, and you can't just as for example in coal and fossil fuel, what all said and done is still critical to the growth of all economies and all countries still. And even though people might uh, discuss alternatives such as other renewables like solar or wind, they all have their own limitations, and it is very hard to get countries to agree on a common platform to take on steps that they perceive will be detrimental to their own economies. So same with plastic, there are differing positions among all countries basis on how important plastic is to their primary economy. So this is this is a graph that the Center for Science and Environment is an organization that has right from the first the first negotiations, pre-negotiations, has been present at this at various plastic treaty fora. So they have on their website regarding the plastic treaty, they have a very nice presentation. So I have kind of borrowed that from the CSC website. So this gives you a kind of cycle of who are the major oil producers in 2022, and what is the regional distribution of global plastic production looking like. So if you see, the US might be 21% of global oil production, because oil distillate is critical to the making of plastic. And but if you see production, it is China that commands nearly 32% of global plastic production, and North America is just 17. The Middle East and Africa is nearly 9, and European Union 14%. So it is these parties that that primarily will influence what we should what we should do about about plastic. So so far, what we have seen, this also is from the CSE, by the way. What we have seen is that most countries are fairly agreed that plastic waste management is a problem. They say that let us just deal with when plastic is produced, we throw it out, but let us think of better ways to collect it, uh, recycling it. And yes, there is only a certain amount that we can recycle realistically, but let us have an extended period, and that is called through a just transition. Let us have a fair, just transition, that we will phase out plastic, but without any timelines, but only at a time when it is done in a way that countries' primary economies are not harmed. So many countries are kind of like, all countries are kind of agreed on that. So that's why these two issues are in green. But now countries have differing positions. In orange means that some countries advocate more action, some advocate less action. So, for example, identifying which are the chemicals and polymers of concern, which are the problematic and avoidable plastic products, what should you do about product design, who should be financing these transitions. Whereas in red, it shows where countries are seriously, there are serious differences within countries. Some countries want an absolute ban on primary plastic polymers. Some countries want absolute bans on trades in certain kinds of plastics. And there is also disagreement on the health aspects. That some say that uh, even the possession and use of all kinds of plastic leads to respiratory diseases or intestinal diseases, uh, are harmful to infants and pregnant women. Whereas some countries say that the evidence for all of this is not strong. So the red are the issues where countries have serious absolute differences. So this is like a very this is like a good graphic. So let's say if we look at the issue of plastic waste management in green, if we look at these countries like, let's say, Canada and the United States, they are um, they are okay with, for example, how current there is a current text by the UN on what we should do about plastic waste management. So they are green means that they are okay with how the wording of the text stands. They say that, for example, the United States. Let me just quote that out. Uh, it supports, for example, that each party shall be consistent with its national laws, take measures to control or reduce emissions and releases of hazardous pollutants. So basically, let each country on its own decide what amount of plastic it has to, it will regulate, it will control. India also is green. India has a similar position on it. So we already have a ban on single-use plastics. There are 22 categories of single-use plastic that are already, officially banned in India. And but there are no restrictions on other grades of plastic. But look at now how much it has changed regarding the production of primary plastic polymers. So look at Russia, look at India, countries in Chad. I mean, countries in South America. Some of these countries are vehemently against any cuts on primary plastic polymers. India has several, oil and petroleum refining, industries, Reliance and etc. For whom the creation of virgin plastic polymer, because that is the material basis which a wide variety of articles are made, and which also ends up being not recycled as often as they ought to be. But look at green. Look at several of the European countries. These are the countries that want much higher, much stronger action on restricting the flow of primary plastic polymers. So to kind of get around this, because all countries, there are 170, 190 countries, countries that are present in these meetings, all consensus among everybody. So as a systematic process, the UN Secretariat has created so-called 4 contact groups. So there are these, one group discusses plastic products and chemicals of concern. Uh, Another group will look at emissions and releases, plastic waste management, and just transition. A third group, all of these groups are formed of different countries. There'll be one informal country leader, and she's meant to take in the views of all countries, create a text, and try to find out common points within them. This group three that will discuss aspects of finance, that is establishing a financial mechanism, capacity building, technical assistance. And finally, there's a final group on implementation and compliance. Like how does the global body, such as a UN or any other designated body, how will it know that countries are actually taking the the commitments that they have promised? And as expected, there is zero consensus even in any of these groups so far. They have not been able to, even one group has not been able to come up with a firm text where everybody's agreed on all aspects. So for example, India says that, whatever you, I mean, we are okay. I mean, we are okay with plastic waste management, but you should not bring in any more uh, any more points or in this new plastic treaty that will already contradict other multilateral agreements like Basel Convention, Stockholm, etc. Whatever treaty comes, it must, so as to say, respect national priorities. You can't tell India to cut plastic. India representatives say to cut plastic production because, just as India does not like to be told that you should cut coal because coal is the most is one of the most polluting greenhouse gases, and India says no, but coal is critical to our economy, and especially when the rest of the industrialized world has become developed countries basis the use of coal in the past. Similarly, you can't ask us to just stop plastic production because it is critical to our people, especially getting uh, people getting affordable products. India has also said that, okay, if you want to transition to any go to any move away from plastic, must mean that developing countries such as India should get finance from developed countries in terms of use. Let's say if you want to develop new kinds of plastic or biodegradable plastic, that all requires huge amount of investments in alternate modes. So we can't afford to make all these investments. Neither do we have the technology. This technology must come for virtually no cost, so that we can then implement it in our own countries, and it is only fair that the richer developed countries do it. No, it has demanded that there be no cuts on primary plastic production because, as I just mentioned earlier, it is critical to several of our biggest, industries. The CSC estimates that since 2022, 24 million tons of plastic packaging has been introduced, and only about 20% is collected. India has something called an extended producer responsibility, the EPR system, where um, in companies that use plastic packaging must ensure that percentage of their production every year is collected and recycled. And there is a whole plastic credit trading system that is evolving around it. There are a lot of issues with that because it has just been launched, and it is not really led to any measurable difference in plastic packaging use. But that's kind of where India stands on. Then there is something called a high ambition coalition. There are nearly 60 European, African countries, and some of the Pacific Island countries. So these are people who are they kind of lead the conversation on ending plastic. So in fact, it started out with 65 before the Busan talks, which was in November 2024. There were about 65 signatories to it. By the time the talks ended, there are 100 more. Totally there are 100 countries that are that see themselves as part of the high ambition coalition. So they say that this is what they reflect. We reaffirm a common ambition of ending plastic pollution by 2040. So very 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 hard targets. And the other bit is that emphasizing the need for a treaty that is based on a comprehensive approach that addresses the full life cycle of plastics, including design, production, consumption, and end of life. It is these last lines that are very problematic to countries like India, Saudi Arabia, and China, Iran. They're called kind of the low ambition countries, and they basically, because as you see, most of these countries are either manufacturers of plastic majorly, or they are plastic. I mean, their economies are way more dependent on it, and thirdly, they are also major producers of oil, which is like their count. I mean, it is like their main product, like Saudi Arabia, Iran, all of these countries. So any cuts on plastic production would mean cuts on the on the usage of oil, and other fossil fuel gases. In fact, there was this, at the negotiations, there was this quote by the representative of Kuwait, Salman Al Ajmi, and he said this, that we have observed attempts to stretch this mandate of plastic of the treaty beyond its original attempt, which is plastic pollution. Everyone is bringing their own lenses and turning it into a pretext for trade restriction, economic agendas, and commercial competition disguised as environmental action. So it is, and this is what you hear during negotiations when you have representatives of countries talking. So if you just see, I mean, at the latest, at the latest in Busan, you would see that out of the total number of participants in attendance, about 160 were from the media out of a total of 260, 2,610. So that would be, I don't know, 5%, I guess, little more than 5%. Whereas you will see observers from non-governmental organizations. These observers basically are the largest block of people. So they can be anybody from NGOs, many of them which work in on environment and plastic pollution related issues. There are industry lobby groups. I mean, representatives from Reliance, and every country, all their biggest, all the biggest countries from businesses from all of these countries. And then you have intergovernmental organizations like UN. They are the smallest group of 32, and you have government members of the committee. So that includes a lot of the governments. I mean, every country sends a delegation. It can be anybody, anything from 5 people to 50 people, depending on how important an issue is to a country, and size matters in all of these things. So if you see from Africa, the most number of participants were from the Asia and the Pacific. That was 1,056. So you can see it's like about 28% of the total, 2,610. So that's kind of the end of the. I hope I've given you kind of a basic of what the core issues in this was in the plastics conference. So my personal experience was this is still not this has still not become a proper treaty yet. So in Busan, uh, it was the fifth round of negotiations since the UNA resolution of 2022, and it was widely expected that all countries would agree upon a common text. That text would only was nothing final. Once that text was ready, it would have to be approved by the ministers. After which, just as you have COP1, COP2, COP 28, whatever, you would have different COPs for plastic, conferences of plastic that would be held every year. So the first COP for for greenhouse gases was in 1995 in Berlin, and today we are at COP 30, which will be held in Brazil later this year. So it is not that. So the Busan one was expected to be this final thing where everybody would be, where countries would finally be negotiating. That's what made it an interesting kind of event to attend. Uh, as far as I understand, I was the only mainstream media representative from India over there, because there were no other representatives from newspapers or even from our prominent television channels. I was the only journalist from India uh, over there. And this is very unlike, for example, in the Conference of Parties, where there are like tens and 20, several, at least 15 to 20 journalists from India alone covering COP negotiations for 10 or for the 10-14 days that it lasts. So this was nothing. So I had a very for me it was a learning experience, because when you get to things like negotiations and all of those things, this is highly technical, because it is very legalistic language. You have to you It is very overwhelming to actually grasp the basic issues. The issue, you might be able to comprehend the basic differences that people have, but because you are only listening to diplomats speak, they never speak, as you probably would be aware, diplomats never speak plainly. They will always speak in roundabout ways, and because proceedings have to be kind of civil and well mannered over there. There were several journalists from Europe, Africa, South America, especially in the media delegation of 160. So because it is a much greater issue over there than it is in India as of now. So that's why I could sense that there were a lot more representatives from these countries. And as a media person, there are restrictions to how much you can access the loom. So all it's like a big convention center. There are rooms earmarked for delegations. The delegations will come, and media is not allowed in most of these rooms. So, but there are the observers, as I pointed out, who are the largest groups. They are the people who are able to allow to observe, what countries are saying. So it looks more like like how lawyers and all would be addressing a judge in a court. Everybody is speaking to the chair, and as observers, you can listen to what your country is saying or what other countries are saying. But the thing with observers is they can't come out and then tell media people, or they can't say that, oh, this is what India said. They can't publicly say that. You can discuss broad issues, like these were the things being said. So as a media person, I don't get direct access, so you have to constantly network with people from various observer groups. You can't only go and speak to, for example, an NGO which is working on plastics. You also have to go and speak to the industry lobbies, because as a journalist you have to have a objective. To your readers, you are presenting an objective, neutral uh, assessment of what happened on each day. So, because this was an 8 day affair, I mean, I was there for 8 days. I was filing stories every day. Now, it's not that there are major developments on every specific day. Some days there would be very little. Uh, all countries have, not decided upon everything. They are not agreed upon it. But some days India will present a text. Some days India will, you have to report. You have to even speak to the Indian. So there are delegations from India's ministries also, like from the Environment Ministry, Commerce, Foreign Trade. So you have to make contacts with them. They will never speak openly all the time. So you have to, try to catch them on the side when they're coming in or coming out of this thing, and try to get them to give you a sense of what's happening. You also have to be very careful, because no Indian delegate will ever give you information which puts India in a bad light. But if you go and speak to a delegate from another country, they will say, "Oh, India is obstructing this particular move. India is, India is not ready to, India is playing very difficult, or Africa is playing very difficult." So you have to hear a lot of views before you actually, file something on a particular day. You must remember, these are UN treaty negotiations. Every word and comma, I mean, any sentence you write over there can be considered as approved only if each and every one of the countries is, approves of it. Everybody has equal right. So it is not that if two-thirds of a set of or countries are agreed upon a position, everybody else has to accept it. No, there have been attempts to try to get this, but countries even debate things like that. How countries like India firmly object to having a quorum. That is, if two-thirds of countries agree to a proposition, everybody else must do that. No, so that is why it is very tedious. People argue for hours over the use of and versus should versus shall. I mean, there have been entire day-long negotiations on just that. It really stretches your comprehension of the English language. But that is how it is. And at the end of it, after 9 days, it turned out that countries could not agree to to any deal, because primarily the positions that I asked, because uh, countries like Saudi Arabia, etc., they felt that you are doing all of this not for environmental benefit, but actually to restrict the economies of other countries. You must also realize that the global treaty is just one, but there are similar issues like WTO, Convention on Biological Diversity. Many times it so happens that decisions you take in one forum like this, like plastics, might influence your negotiating stance in other issues. And let's not even get into things like the UN Security Council, So that's why, and many times the diplomats are kind of common in all of these. So that's why when they are negotiating plastic, it is not that they're only thinking about plastic, they are thinking about what, if I agree to something, what consequences can it have in other negotiations in some other treaty. So that's why they have to come back, and there is only so much power that a diplomat in the environment ministry can take, because he has to come back to his superiors in the foreign affairs ministry, and if it's a big policy decision, it requires the cabinet and much higher bodies to take a call. So I think I'll kind of wrap up over here, and I'm open to and happy to take your questions, clarifications, and thanks a lot for listening to me over here. And I hope I have been useful. So thanks, Famsi, and open to questions.
Hi, Mr. Jacob. Thank you so much. You have clearly put down the different nuances, including this process. How, as I told you at the starting, these are there is a lot of political things, there is economic things, there are technical things in this negotiation. You have clearly put out to them, and we will have some 5 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah.
So there is one question which is technical, not related to the process. So plastic is widely used in packaging of various items. What is the
Yeah.
best alternative of plastics, which is environment friendly as well as cost effective too? So Mr. Bijay Singh has asked this question.
Okay. So there is a whole thing about biodegradable plastics or compostable plastics. Now, by the government is there are a couple of companies in India that are actually making both of these kinds of plastics. But let's take biodegradable plastic. The Central Pollution Control Board had actually approved one category of biodegradable plastics, and there were some manufacturers who were making it. But what happened was that there is still no test report, they say, that environment ministry says, which can prove that this plastic will be 100% biodegradable. So there are tests which have shown that this plastic, if you treat it with a particular chemical, it will it will shrink down to 90, it will degrade by 90% of its original size within 1 year. But the thing is, now will the 90% become 100%? That is the issue, because sometimes you can it is not a linear process. It's not that after 4 years it will definitely lose under 10%. So nobody has proved that this thing has become absolute zero. Then there is a complication that, okay, even if it has become 100%, has it completely the micro to the microplastics level? How can, because nowadays people are finding lots of microplastics also, which is not discernible to the by normal testing processes. So biodegradable plastics really haven't caught on yet, but over time, if more convincing tests etc. are able to prove that they are indeed biodegradable, they could be an alternative. Naturally, they are much more expensive. Saying just as coal is the most inexpensive way to coal and petrol are the most inexpensive way to run machines and engines. Nothing can ever compare to plastic in that. So there needs to be a lot more technology changes. Compostable plastic is slightly different. It is great. It is it can break down into cellulose and all of those more organic constituents. But the problem with compostable plastic is that it is only compostable as long as it is all collected and it is sent to particular factories or industrial centers, which will actually break it down. Now, getting this aspect, that is, getting it, collecting it, and sending it to the to the plants for processing, that is the major challenge. And that is why you are still seeing, even though it's a much more proven technology, the cost of having physical units and outputting is the reason why it hasn't really taken off. But yes, these are all the things of the future, and this is what the all world economies and governments everywhere hope people will move towards. But I think we are still quite far away from this. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So thank you, Jacob. There is one more question, Jacob. So question is from Mr. Abirami.
Uh-huh.
There are certain lands for dumping the waste. I think, as you told, the Aravalli Hills, which you saw, which we are also seeing in Chennai. We have few more
Yeah.
here. So dumping the waste. Nowadays, the lands has been reducing because of the lot of waste produced by the people. And so,
Hmm.
how can we cover these kind of stories and make people aware of it? So, how can we best present these kind of stories to the people?
uh, I think the best way, as you probably have learned in journalism school, is show and tell. I mean, you have to. I mean, of course, the problem is that, let's say, dumping grounds. We are aware of it. We all know what it is. And when we are exposed to something for a long time, we are kind of desensitized to it. That is the major tragedy of how we respond to environmental problems. So people know that these are these landfills, and these need to go away. But there is no. I personally think that there is no other choice other than, at least from the perspective of us journalists, other than reminding people of the consequences of this, because you can write through your stories and your photographs and your photojournalism, or video journalism, or every any other mode of journalism, is to have our newspapers and our media outlets continuously reporting on this particular issue. Secondly, we can discuss alternatives. We must have a greater conversation around what I was say about biodegradable plastics and compostable plastics, so that even other authorities are aware, are more aware, or at least are more inclined to even consider that what are the real challenges to not having compostable or to not having biodegradable. Can we address them? So once there is at least the hint of a solution, there might be more enthusiasm among them to actually consider these alternatives. And then you know we have to engage we have to engage a lot of civil society, governments, both at the state and right down to the panchayat level, and tell them about the consequences of plastic pollution, how it is not just an eyesore. People generally tend to think of plastic as single of just paper bags and plastic bags, and how it looks so bad. And if you could that the we have to tell people that it is the problem beyond that, how it affects other organisms, oceans. So it's a matter of sensitization. It's a very, very long game. That is why, even something like carbon dioxide, people know everything about it, but we are still not seeing major headway, except, it's taken years and years. Plastic will be even more challenging from what I see. So as journalists, our only job is to just keep at it and hope for the best.
Thank you, Jacob. Well kept. I think that's what keep nudging, keep pushing.
Yeah.
And I also request the students to keep asking questions because this workshop is for you and you'll not get the chance to speak with such a seasoned journalist every time. So keep asking the question. So before we close the Q&A, Jacob, I have only one question. If, for example,
Mhm.
if I am as a new journalist going out, if you can
Mhm.
give me three tips which I can keep in mind if I am selected for going to negotiations. Let's say I've got the opportunity to attend the negotiations. Let's say we have the next one in Geneva, right?
Anyway, yes, yes.
5.2. So if as a young journalist I got a chance, if you can give me three tips, what exactly I should be prepared before I go to negotiations, what can be those?
So three tips is you have to read up background on the various negotiating positions of countries. Number two, you have to kind before going, try to make at least know the names of people in the Indian delegation, or representatives of governments, representatives of countries. Uh, know their names and try to make some kind of contact, because they will be the ones who will be giving you. And third is, there are already several good environmental groups. Let's say groups like the Center for Science and Environment. You know, make contact with those people, because they will give you. They will be the observers. They will be able to observe a lot of things, and they will tell you, what are the interesting positions over there. unlike in many other things, the unfortunately there's very little to see in all of these places, because it's just people talking, sitting in a building and talking. So you cannot report on other stuff outside. It's not that there are fairs or there's demonstrations happening where you but all the time you have to remember that the discussions can get very technical and boring, and even your audience is not primarily interested in the small minutiae of discussions. They're interested in the way you explain an issue to them. So how much knowledge you have to kind of learn how to compress that into simple sentences that people and people should just feel, not that they have that they have got a solution from your writing. You should give the sense to people that they have become slightly smarter and slightly more aware after reading your story. So you might have to repeat the same thing all the time again and again, because I wrote every day. I was writing 1 or 2 stories for 8 days, even though there was not much development happening on each of those 8 days. So how to make one story different from the other while telling pretty much the same thing? That is, of course, a challenge. You will, you will, you will learn all the time. But making contacts with people is the primary mode of getting into it, and speak to a wide variety, not only the Indian people. You have to speak to delegations from all across, make contact. Many people are very, very happy to discuss issues. So once you speak to a wide variety of problem, you will get, you'll get be able to write good, interesting stories. And of course, there are, as these go, there will be more journalists. You can always speak to people who have already covered this and get insights from them. So it's learning by doing, as if like in every other aspect of journalism.
Thank you, Jacob. One last question. There is an interesting one.
Mm.
So there is a question: how can I get a grant to participate in these negotiations as a journalist? Are there any sources for me to apply or something? Is question from Mr. Afroz Khan.
So I don't. Uh, there are certain European Action Network or GSSC. These are two organizations that routinely fund journalists for for going for conferences like this. It's the same set of people. I mean, people that also fund journalists to cover the COP negotiations.
Okay.
So if you can, they publicize grants on their website if it is, if it is available. In my case, I didn't really apply to it because I've been covering these. I know per certain people, who take, but mostly experienced journalists who are, who have, who covered it. So they kind of, they say that yes, we will give you, we are willing to sponsor you, and there is no. And at least for us, we have to be ensure that you are neutral, and it's not that you have they get to dictate what you will write. But most places are like that. They fund you, and they give you I mean, you can write whatever you want, or you will not write what you want, if it is not making a story. But there are, I mean, you can personally just write to me. If I come to know about these things, I can probably email you, or it could be, I'll
Def-
pass you on contacts if at all I get to know of sources.
Definitely. That would be helpful. And
Yeah,
as I told you, for the participants, we will be sharing an email where we'll have all these links sending to you. So during the okay, thank you, Jacob. It was very insightful, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
great. Thanks a lot, and all the best to all of you.
So now we will move to the next session, where our next speaker is an independent with nearly a decade of experience across print, television, digital, and audio, politics, climate, civic issues, law, and gender in South India. She has worked with Hindustan Times, NDTV 24/7, The Coin, and now collaborates on documentaries and long form reports for Bloomberg, ABC News, and Deutsche Welle, and Channel 4. She is also a recipient of fellowships from Deutsche Welle, the US State Department, and Chevening South Asia Journalism Fellowship 2025. She has also led workshop on refugee crisis and migration. Her award-winning documentary Flooded but Parched in Chennai led to TEDx Talk, and her investigative work on climate and social justice has secured grants from Earth Journalism Network. And she has also covered major elections, interviewed key leaders, and reported on pressing issues like demonetization, COVID-19, and caste segregation. Beyond journalism, she mentors young reporters and develops learning modules, including one on renewable energy, which and her impact for storytelling has driven real-world change from securing aid for flood victims to supporting girls' education. Please join me in welcoming Miss Smita. Smita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vamsi. Hello, everyone. I think Jacob has given an absolute comprehensive understanding of what this treaty means. And what I'm going to go into, as a journalist, what does this treaty mean to you? And what's the responsibility that you have in telling this story? Because there was one statement that Jacob said, which I'm going to take off to state saying, don't say, show. You always show and tell, and that's how you can create impact. That's how you can reach people. Now, plastic waste is not just an environmental issue, it's a political, economic, social issue. In fact, it's even a human crisis. The International Plastic Treaty aims to establish a legally binding framework to combat plastic pollution worldwide. But all these treaties and policies always don't really resonate with the public unless they are told through powerful, relatable stories, which is it could be the overflowing bins or landfills of Delhi or Chennai or the beaches of Mumbai littered with plastic, or how olive ridley turtles are just choked with plastic nets and bottles and washing up dead on the shores of Chennai or Odisha for that matter. The impact is very visible, it's very visceral. But how do we translate these overwhelming statistics into very compelling, interesting narratives? And that's where visual storytelling plays a crucial role. I've been a journalist who worked with a print news space, and then I moved to NDTV, television space, and then I moved to the Quint, which did digital space. And right now I'm an independent journalist. And the only reason I especially made this switch is to actually play with all these mediums because it's imperative to reach every single person in every strata there is to tell your story. Um, Vamsi, if you could just move to the next slide. So, if you can read the text here, I'm just quickly going to read. These are headlines from leading newspapers and TV channels published online. It says India begins to ban single use plastic, including cups and straws. Complete plastic ban in Vishakhapatnam from Jan 1st. Government bans manufacture, sale, and use of unidentified single use plastic. What do these mean? These are just headlines. They most often climate stories in mainstream media focus on government announcements, pledges, policy changes. These stories quote a lot of officials, government heads. They highlight new bans, showcase agreements, such as especially put them in global context. But real journalism goes beyond the press releases. See, next slide, please. It digs into the ground reality. It questions the effectiveness of policies and amplifies the voices of those who are directly impacted. Say, for example, in 2016, India announced a nationwide plastic ban. In 2022, India banned single use plastic, including straws, cutlery. Um, we live in a post-COVID era where, all of us, be it a Swiggy or an Instamart or a Zepto order, the amount of plastic that is just accumulating in our houses. You go and get a tender coconut outside, you get a straw, which is plastic. You buy a pet bottle from a multi-millionaire company, it's still in plastic. In every way, what you need to do is not just report that story, just picking up lines from a press release, because you're not publishing a press release, you're publishing a report from the ground. So in 2023, generating 3.5 million tons of plastic waste annually. So, talk about where did the ban fail? Go beyond that press release. Go beyond an announcement. Second, there's a lot of corporate greenwashing that happens. That is, many companies, both Indian and global, they claim to be plastic neutral, but they continue to produce single-use plastic, basically shifting the responsibility to consumers. So when you see a statement, it's imperative for you to not take it at face value, but dig deep to understand where it is. Ask questions. I mean, that's literally what our job is and what we actually enjoy doing. Third, most important, follow-up. A saying India announces a new plastic ban, but track the enforcement. Are penalties imposed? Have affordable alternatives provided? Someone here just asked me the question saying, yes, we're talking about, oh no, plastic ban, but what's the alternative? Is it affordable? I'm pressuring a woman selling tender coconut on the streets to switch from plastic straws to paper straw. The economic difference that she's having is 2 rupees for each straw itself. And that's a lot, a price that she's paying, while multi-millionaire dollar companies continues to just abuse and exploit this. Um, I'm to just give you a contrast. A PR story would be India aims to recycle 60% of its plastic waste by 2030. But what a real story would be about go to the waste pickers, those who handle 90% of India's recycling, who are in fact excluded completely from this whole formal waste management policy, and in fact struggle with extremely unsafe, unsanitary working conditions. Governments are talking of door to door collection systems, source segregation. Great. But where's the waste going? All together to the landfill, which sometimes is the marshland, which is sometimes choking waterways. Bamsi, could you please play the YouTube video that I have shared the link of? So this is just a 1 minute. I'll just play the first 1 minute of the video. This is called the Palikarne marshland. It just received the Ramsar status recently, and that is to deem that that is to basically protect it climate-wise as well. However, it's interesting how there's a road that passes, and on the left is a beautiful marshland. It's one of the main reasons why uh, 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 handling the waterways in Chennai. And on the right side of this beautiful marshland is a giant landfill. So I may be segregating my garbage in my house, but where is it going? It's going here. The reason also why I'm showing this story is often it's not very easy showing the extent of damage. You can show one plastic cover, one bottle, but often we don't have access to a huge choked up space because that will definitely trigger someone watching it. If you could watch this video for a minute.
We don't want Switzerland grass top. What we want is American marshland. Look at the water, you find these bubbles coming up. That's all decomposed organic matter, probably as a result of garbage dumping and a result of sewage.
Government needs to only be a custodian of any water body. They are not the owners of the water bodies, right?
Chennai is said to be the lone wetland in Chennai that can help prevent floods and droughts as it acts as a natural sponge, storing monsoon rains and releasing them during the dry months. But now, the marshland has shrunk in size and turned from a carbon sink into a methane pool.
Okay, Vamsi, you can just pause. I shall share the links to this video as well later because it's imperative to showcase the reality when Tamil Nadu got this status or Palikane got this Ramsar status, everyone was talking about it. But who's talking about what's on the other side of the road? How bizarre it is, even when you're talking about conservation, when you're talking about reducing plastic pollution, and there you have giant hills of garbage and plastic just choked up. Next, a PR story would be about how corporates are committing to plastic neutrality. But the real story is, say, Coca-Cola, the world's biggest plastic polluter, that funds cleanups while continuing to sell billions of plastic bottles every day. Do a ground report tracing where India's single-use plastic ends up. Trace how one maybe just a plastic cover that you get at your provision store. Start from where it's produced to where it lands. That will tell the story. When a PR story is when a state government imposes 25,000 rupees fine on plastic rule violators. The real story is you'll go find out who is getting these who is getting these, who's issued these fines? Is it the woman selling cut fruit, watermelon and mango on the roadside, or a tender coconut seller? Because big manufacturers often face no consequences. And my most favorite are these global stories, which says things like India joins the bandwagon for global efforts to reduce plastic waste. It means nothing to us. Climate consciousness can be awakened only if you and I realize how much we're paying for it, how much we're affected by it, how much we need to pay more in the future. So focus on villages, say, living along the Ganga, which are who are drinking plastic contaminated water. There are microplastics in their food, in their bloodstream. This is leading to rising cancer cases. Talk about these microplastics in milk, in salt, in even bottled water. I think that's where the real story is. Could you go to the next slide, please? Vamsi?
Yeah. This one or the next one?
This one.
Yeah.
So now coming to how do we do effective storytelling? What really works and what really makes you think? Now we're living in a time where we're not competing with a fellow news organization to get an audience attention to read a story. I'm competing with a social media influencer who is doing a 30-second video on with a makeup tutorial, or a funny or a holy video for that matter. So the the competition online to grab the audience attention is massive. And when we talk stories, like how Jacob said, he was one of the only mainstream journalists at this conference, which is a stark contrast to how many political reporting or even cinema reporting. While climate is very, very integrally related to our politics, our economics, our social parameters, and so it's important to tell a story very effectively and to also grab attention. You just have the rule of how you have 5 seconds to grab your attention. I remember 10 years ago when I started journalism, that's what it was said. Now it's first 2 seconds. I have 2 seconds, and right now some social people on social media are doing absolutely brilliant work in grabbing attention. And it's important for me to get some attention through while talking about plastic. So the text, first of all, if you just take a quick look at the text, it looks boring. It's very important information, but it looks boring. When I say 3.5 million tons of plastic waste generated in India annually, what does that mean to me? I can't visualize 3.5 million tons. You are speaking to an audience, say, well, let's talk about India. They are looking to make ends meet sometimes. They are looking to figure out how to get my child married, or how to get my child educated, or how do I ensure that my child doesn't get abused. These are some of their daily life issues. So for them to be interested or to be aware of things like this, you have to give it more context. Again, like say 90% of tap water in India contains microplastics. Very interesting. Still not grabbing my attention yet. Vamsi, can you move to the next slide? Now, look at these. This is an example of how effective can actually tell these strong stories even better. In this story, the plastic bag gives a very, very interesting uh, visual. And this is also for me to say that as a journalist, you don't have to just be a video journalist or a reporter on ground. Being a graphic journalist and putting together infographics like this is a very, very important skill set that you can have. And it's very important, very imperative right now in the present state of affairs in journalism. Can we go to the next one? So there we talked about how there's 90% of microplastics in water. Sure, it's a strong fact. Still doesn't make sense to me. But just look at this graphic. Just by specifying very simple everyday objects and mentioning how long it takes to decompose, that gives the person a very, very strong awakening. It makes it more real. It just to think about, oh, if I dispose my diaper this way, this is how the repercussions are. So it's a more realistic, relatable idea you're giving, and you're not giving your audience much homework. You're doing the homework so that they can just receive it, understand it, comprehend it, and probably implement it in their lives or even have a conversation about it. Next slide, please. Um, so this visual, the reason why I've taken this apart from all the data pointers that are mentioned, again, I throw in words like 128, 128,480, Andhra Pradesh, it makes no sense. But just this visual of a man smashing a bottle, um, it could mean a lot of things. One is how inconsiderate we are or nonchalant we are about garbage that's just choking. We literally step over it and walk and we don't care. It talks about that, but it also talks about how we should put an end to it. So, in small ways, you can make your graphic extremely effective, extremely eye grabbing, that someone would want to read more about it. Um, Next, okay, now that we've, what stories really work? Vamsi, can we go to the next slides, please? While we talked about problems earlier, let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about people. The next slide, please. Any day, while it's important to have a global understanding of what's happening in terms of treaties, how policies are being implemented on a national level, on a state level, what are the initiatives, what is the panchayat level order that's been given to ensure that we are living a more sustainable life. But real people relate to people after all. Follow simple stories like how follow individuals who are impacted by or are tackling plastic pollution. Focus on waste pickers. There are over 3 million waste pickers who are literally the backbone of informal plastic recycling. It's important to put focus on this because constantly the argument that we have is the ones who contribute least to plastic pollution, least to climate change, are the most affected by it. And they are the least talked about. And they are definitely not part of the policy making decisions, while they actually live close to the disaster. It's quite an irony. And that's why the responsibility of the journalist is to constantly talk about these stories, talk about solutions proposed by the communities, such things that have been tried and tested by them. Because only then will you be that fourth pillar of democracy, putting out these stories, demanding answers, even from elected representatives. Another, also, now when we talk about plastic, it's not just about a cover or a paper, sorry, or a plastic bottle. We got to talk plastic in the intersectionality of caste, class, human rights, pollution, climate crisis, because a person is, especially living in India, is affected on all these grounds because of plastic pollution as well. While we talk about the conflict, show the crisis, show how we report floods, we report cyclones. But once that floods are once the first 4 days when there is huge havoc is done reporting, go back to the place. See how much of plastic is just thrown up by the beach on the shore. Talk about that. Find out what kind of plastics are showing up. Rope in NGOs. There are so many wonderful activists, experts doing some spectacular work constantly to understand. A layman is not going to be able to access that research work, but you will. It's going to be a lot of putting it together, but it's important too because only then we address the conflict as it's happening, we follow it up, and also can move towards resolution. Then comes to visualizing data. I think that's something we just saw about, be it animated infographics showing a before, after images, use satellite images. I'll show you a couple more tools in the later on slides on how we can do this. And also now with VR and AI, we can show a lot with augmented reality, have an interactive map, and these maps can be constantly updated over years. For example, for 10 years, I documented how the crisis of water crisis was gripping Chennai. And it's not an act, it's not that, oh, I have to document this. Over your experience, if you follow up the same story, you can exactly know how much Nandini has a woman living in a slum in a very small locality in Chennai has suffered financially, socially, over 10 years. And only this, in a way, will give you also a realistic understanding of what's happening on the ground. And please talk community driven solutions, not just in India, cross country collaborations as well. Right now, Germany, when I visited Germany, I was astounded. I read about how rude Germans are, but I was astounded by how many times people were scolded for just not putting trash in the right way. When I say there are four bins and you have to take your time, it's all written in German, but take your time, figure out which item goes into what and drop it. And if I drop it wrong, a person who's just walking on the road, has nothing to do with me, walks up to me and corrects me and tells me not to do that, teaches me that. What am I trying to say here? That talks about how this country has also brought this civic awareness as well. And that's an idea we borrow when we read stories by other countries, when we visit other countries, even other states for that matter, borrow solutions that are adaptable. I mean, we're not going to take a page from the colonial mindset and just impose a West concept, but propose doable solutions that are affordable as well. And in fact, in our own cities, we have a lot of community driven solutions, like say Alapura in came up one town there came up with they completely eliminated public waste dumps, and it's interesting how very casually they go and throw the garbage waste. There is absolutely no plastic covers given anywhere. And so when the product itself doesn't exist, what can they do? Then talk about stories like, say, in Mumbai's Versova beach, after the cleanup was done, olive ridley turtles returned to the nest after decades. And that's how nature, this actually planet doesn't need to be saved. It just needs us to remember how to live with it more sustainably. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is just a quick idea of some tools and formats. Next slide, please. There are different ways you can do stories effectively. It could start with short documentaries that could be on, say, eco warriors, local activists, scientists, policymakers working towards a plastic free future. Or we can go to explainer videos, motion graphics, use animated video explaining what this treaty is. And also reach vernacular, do it in vernacular languages as well, because your idea is to reach a broader audience as well. Use a scroll based interactive story, maybe following a single use plastic from the time it's manufactured to its purchase to the landfill, and then maybe a futuristic idea of what could happen or how long it will take to degrade this. All this makes it very realistic. And then now that we know how important social media is, and how that's where most people go to get their entertainment, the news, the music, it's important for you to visualize every story for how it will look on social media as well. Maybe a before after challenge showing beaches post cleanup, and also this beach cleanup. Often, when we talk about these plastic treaties, immediately you see stories, people doing, oh, this NGO is now doing a Sunday beach cleanup in Chennai Beach, in the Bombay Beach. It's just a cleanup. Find out who's doing this. Why is it doing? Is it if it's a corporate heading that cleanup? What else have they done to look into plastic? If they're an international organization, find out what they've done globally as well. That's your story, not your story. A story that a participant who's going to be cleaning up that beach will post that story of them picking up plastic trash anyway. Can we go to the next slide, please? And why is it important to stay with the story? Um, in 2018, the Tamil Nadu government issued a ban on single-use plastics, and it was huge. It created a huge buzz. Everyone was talking about it. This was around the same time when the whole smart city initiative was proposed. And T Nagar, which is this extremely bustling shopping area, anyone who's come to Chennai goes there to buy all the pattu saris, the Kanchipuram saris, and this area was picked to be the a smart city area, and also obviously a no plastic free zone. So we reported that this was an announcement made. However, what were the challenges? And then about 1 year later, I went back to T Nagar to do a reality check of what's happening with implementation, violation. Let's talk plastic and real. Interestingly, the story, 1 year later, Madras High Court took suo motu cognizance of how there's been huge flouting of norms and massive usage of plastic. And this story was played at the Madras High Court when someone from the government argued saying everything is in order, sorry, from the corporation, and the story was played to show that no, but clearly it's not. Can we just play the next story, please?
Government issued a ban on non-biodegradable single-use plastics. 8 months down the line, how's the city faring? Let's find out. It's 10:30 p.m. I'm in Ranganathan Street, a major shopping location. And every shop here, clothes, electronics, shoes, bags, accessories, name it, every shop insists that the customer brings their own bag. Or you can buy a cloth bag for 10, 20, 30 rupees. So one would assume to not see much plastic around. But I'm sure you can see the ocean of plastic I'm walking through.
Can we play the next video, please?
Are offering customers with paper bags and cloth bags. Well, I spy with my little eyes. And wait, what do I see here? Tinagar has been chosen to be the smart city area for the city. And there you see, more plastic. These are supposed to be stoppers placed on the footpaths so that vehicles don't get onto them. This is Sengeni Amma's tender coconut shop on the footpath here in Tinagar. நம்ம பிளாஸ்டிக் ஸ்ட்ரா யூஸ் பண்றதெல்லாம் ரொம்ப பண்ணக்கூடாதுன்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்கல்ல, அது உங்களுக்கு எவ்வளவு கஷ்டமா இருந்திருக்கு அந்த மாதிரி மாத்துறது?
கஷ்டமா தான் இருக்குது. ₹1 ஒரு ஸ்ட்ரா வருது லாஸ்ட் இதுல பேப்பர்ல. இங்க காய் வாங்குறது நாங்க விலை கொடுத்து அதிகமா வாங்குறோம்.
Well, here's Ponnamma's shop for a change. She sells tender coconuts as well, but with paper straws. இங்க ஏதாவது ரெய்டுக்கு ஏதாவது வராங்களா செக் பண்றது?
வராங்க, கார்பரேஷன்ல இருந்து வராங்க.
அந்த பக்கம் இருக்கிறவங்க எல்லாம் சாதா ஸ்ட்ரா விக்கிறாங்களே, அவங்க அப்புறமா அவங்க பிடிப்பாங்களா? ரெய்டு வந்து எடுத்துட்டு போவாங்க.
₹500
Yes, thank you, Vamsi. Um, now, the reason why that story resonated a lot was because it was literally a ground report on what's happening. The story goes on to show how these small vendors are repeatedly harassed with violations, while the government had not even put in place adequate, affordable alternatives. There was no kind of education done among the vendors as to how they can make the switch. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about specifics of implementation. There's an international treaty we're talking about. Then it flows down to the national level and the state level. So, what are these governments doing to implement them? Ask questions. I'm not asking you to criticize. I'm just telling you to ask questions. Report what's on ground. So many people on ground who engage with use plastics every day will be able to give you a way more better understanding of this. Now, to one, I think this slide is merely to show you what are the different kind of tools you can use for storytelling. I can share the slideshow with you later so you can take a look at it. Say Google Earth Studio is a spectacular tool for you to get good top angle shots when your drone shots don't work. Say, for example, the Pallikarnai documentary that I showed, the story was very, very intense. But the reason why it was very difficult to capture it was when I'm standing here 2D, there is no plastic I can see that's choking. There is no garbage mountains I can showcase. I have to get a drone to actually show how green and beautiful and lush one area looked, while this is how choked the other space looked. So there are times you can use Google Earth Studio. Then I'm just going to, can you go to the next slide, Vamsi? I'm just going to show you one tool which will be very helpful. Say in this example, if you see, there's a beautiful picture of Taj Mahal. There's also a picture of Taj Mahal, which is also the reality. Anyway, can you move to the next slide, please? And that's Marine Drive in Mumbai. Now, I'm just going to share my screen just to show you. Okay, now this is a very, very important tool. I think comes very handy when we talk about big numbers and data pointers. This is a very free app called Flourish Studio. Imperative for you to uh, play with it. You can play with all kinds of styles. It's very, very easy to use. I'm just going to show you one use of how the same Taj Mahal story, this is how you can do. This is just a simple slider format. Now, it might sound simple, but stories showing visuals like this often really help in effective storytelling. I think that's almost done. Yes, so uh, that's pretty much what I have to say. I think we just can't say the plastic under the rug. It's important for us to face it. It's already in our water, in our food, in our blood. And this plastic crisis is just piling up in landfills. So let's go beyond that announcement or the policy headline. Let's talk about real action. And as journalists, I think we need to cut through this clutter, expose the truth beyond buzzwords, and yes, don't just tell, show and tell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Smita. And I think definitely the tools and different ways, different techniques you can use to tell the story. I think you have put it right away for the people who are the upcoming journalists, actually. So there is one question from Madhumita, Miss Madhumita. Okay. Is it possible to challenge and reform large corporate industries to prevent pollution and waste dumping in our natural resources?
Yes, absolutely. It starts again from following up, from reporting a story with absolute truth and staying with the story. Something as simple as I think Unilever had done this. It's the first story that I have on my top of my mind. It's not plastic, but they were extremely polluting this space. And then a barrage of people came in, like from a Sophia Ashraf doing a rap song. And it was not just Sophia Ashraf's rap song that stood out, it was the extensive journalistic pieces that went on ground, talk about the effects of cancer, talked about skin ailments, talked about the repercussions on a climate level, and consistently reporting. Now, just saying, while I talk about it's important to consistently report, it's also important to understand that media organizations, especially mainstream organizations, don't give as much space to report climate, to report plastic, to report a water crisis unless someone it's flooded or it's a drought. That's a thing that you have to constantly navigate, because I think it's important for you to also remember this isn't an issue of just water or plastic or climate. It encompasses so many aspects, and caste and class and politics and economics play a very, very crucial role in how much access one has as well. So yes, it is possible. And there is a plethora of research organized spaces, NGOs that can help you with data pointers as well, which can strengthen your story. Because when you go big, go against, again, when you stand up for a story that's against a big corporate, all you need is the truth by your side. You need to just back yourself up with strong facts, and then there's nothing against you. And there have been so many times impact has been brought about. Like this one story of the Tinagar thing, after this, there was a whole crackdown done, and it was actually implemented. Violations were put on bigger establishments, not on the small vendors. There was educative exercise it brought about. And that's why it's also important for you to not just talk about the problem, talk about the solution as well.
One last question, Smita, because we are running out of time a little. How can young journalists expose these issues through social media, say Instagram, Twitter, and specialized importance to make people aware in a basic way?
Every time we do a story, it's important first to tell the story in a strong, effective manner. You choose your medium. Say, for example, I'm going to do a short video documentary, and a short video documentary is accompanied with a text story as well. Say, the documentary is about 5 minutes, the text story is about 1,000 words. Why am I doing this? I'm catering to the audience that just wants to come watch a video and leave. Done. I am also catering to the audience that wants to take some time, go through the content, read the text, understand the story, maybe watch a little data. Done. Now, how do I attend to the age group of like say 15 to 35, 40, which is there on Instagram, then like from 50 to 70 on Facebook, and a whole other audience on Twitter. The audience for all of these social media channels are different, which means the way you put out the same story on different social media spaces should be also different. Just on top of my mind, when I think this was around the time that Deepika Padukone had got married. And usually around this time, when you do stories, your stories don't get visible. Everyone wants to check out which lehenga they're wearing or who's the best makeup artist. And it doesn't matter even if 1,000 farmers have died, no one's reading that story. But we put out this very strong story of how the Pollution Control Board in Tamil Nadu and of a few manufacturing companies were choking this river so much that it was full of plastic and ash. No one was watching the story. We put out a small reel, and the reel had this song from Gehraya. It was a movie that was released around that time, and everyone was doing reels with that song. And the song had me going in a beautiful boat. It's very serene. So it's got your attention. It fits the whole Gehraya vibe that everyone has on social media. And in the next 4 seconds, I have you staring at ash-filled prawns and prawns stuck into a plastic bottle. So something that was very evocative and beautiful, and I've got your attention. And then now I've really got your attention. And then now you'd want to go to watch the actual story or engage. So it's important for you. It might sound like a lot of work. Sometimes it is a lot of work. But I think there's a responsibility we have to do effective storytelling comes from ensuring that we curate content to different age groups, different people of different strata, and that's how we can actually get our story across.
Thank you, Smita. And thank you, Prithvi, for asking. I think it's a very important question where in the world we live in, attention, which that attention span is very little, is very important. So good question. So thank you so much, Smita. I think definitely the participants would have taken notes on all the important tools and techniques which you have shared. And we hope more coverage will be there on plastic pollution and the global plastic treaty as well. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you.
Thank you, Vamsi.
So now the final session where we'll have our next speaker who brings over 15 years of experience across India and Singapore with a strong foundation in the media sector. She began her career in Singapore, working in publishing houses for 4 years before returning to her hometown Delhi in 2012 to pursue journalism. Over the years, she has worked with leading media organizations such as Business Today, Financial Express, Business World, and 9.9, covering a diverse range of topics including management, human resources, consumer brands, education, social media, and startups. Currently at India Today magazine, she specializes in long form trend pieces on consumer businesses, HR, environment, gender, and climate, among others. She holds a master's degree in English literature from the National University of Singapore and a bachelor's degree in English literature from Dowlat Ram College of Delhi. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Sonal.
Thank you, Vamsi.
Thank you so much, Sonal, for joining. So just for the audience, this is a little bit different what we are doing for this session,
Yes.
where you had presentations from other speakers in other two sessions, where I will be asking questions. This is more like a panel discussion where I will be asking questions and Sonal will be answering from her experience. I
Yes,
hope
sure.
everyone is okay with that. So let's start with a basic question. So you have been reporting as from your profile, I can see you have been uh, uh, reporting on different things, different areas, Sonal. How does reporting on this global plastic treaty or plastic pollution differ from other areas?
Okay, so I'll give you a bit of context here and I'll
Yeah.
tell you why that is important. Right. So, for example, when I started my career as a business journalist. I was writing on startups, entrepreneurship. And over time, I started getting interested in impact-led area, social entrepreneurship. And from there, I moved to environment and climate is still work in progress. Businesses, so when you look at a story especially when you look at long form content, which is where I specialize in, like I've always been a magazine journalist. One of the things that you're not in the business of news, right? So I'm not breaking news that this is happening. I am analyzing it. So my stories will come after everyone is done with the news, and then 1 week later you will see my piece in the magazine, right? So that is how it is. So, but what we bring to the table is then you have that time to speak to all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. So what I mean, and so for example, if I'm doing a business story, usually what is important, the business, what is the business model, the consumers, right? It is a very simple, straightforward trajectory. But when you're looking at a topic like plastic, the number of stakeholders are just immense. They're numerous, right? Because there is a foreign diplomacy involved, there is economic angle, there is the business angle, there is a livelihood issue, there is an environment angle, there's a health angle, right? And you have to bring all of that in. And then on top of it, you also have to we all know that the attention is very short, right? So what is that one peg that gets your attention to read my 2000-word piece, right? So this is very different when you are looking at a plastic environment related story.
So, adding to that point, Sonal, you told me how it is this different, right? So how I can make this more accessible to the general public now through print media? I think how is it possible for me to make more reach out to more people through print media? I think in the previous session we have here through digital how it is possible, right? So here how I can make it more accessible to the people.
Okay. So I will also give you a bit of context here. See, there is no print journalist now. While we are writing for the magazine, we are also doing online stories and we are also doing videos, right? So we have our hands everywhere. So, but having said that, if you're looking at any story, whether it is long form or online, one of the basic questions is what the basic question as a journalist that you have to ask is, who am I writing for, right? And, and your audience probably is not there at the Global Plastic Treaty reading those scientific documents, right? They are general people who probably have their normal 9 to 5 job, but they still want to know issues that are impacting them, and maybe they don't even know that it's impacting them, right? So, and that is where your responsibility as a journalist comes in. So I think the number one question you have to ask yourself is, who am I writing for? And a lot of times, I think what I also feel is that a lot of times journalists, what they do this mistake is they take a lot of information they know for granted. Everyone will know this. I think this is very critical. Like, for example, yesterday I was reading this piece in a paper, and it was about this topic on derivatives. It was a business paper. And then the story went on and on. It was a 600-word piece, but there was no line on what derivatives are, right? So, and then I was thinking that, okay, so here I am, I'm a business journalist, but what about if someone else in my family is also reading this newspaper, but they probably would not know and they'll be frustrated by the end of the time, right? Because you have invested your time. So I think that is very important. At least your story, how much ever is it, even if it's a 400-word story, it has to answer the basic why, when, where, how, what. I mean, and I think these are the very basic fundamentals of story writing that we sometimes forget. And this is very critical in reporting on environment, especially for topics like plastic, because they are so technical. Like, how many of us actually really understand what plastic is? I mean, we know plastic is a paper bag. A plastic bag. We know plastic is our, those single disposable takeaway packets, boxes. But do we really know that plastics is actually even sometimes they are also in the garb of cloth bags? A lot of our clothes, which come across as cotton, but not cotton. How do we as journalists then explain this to our audience through our words? I think these are the things that we should always explain. And that is why I think online stories actually are very critical, because, like, for example, when I was actually doing, so I did not go to South Korea. for Global Plastics Treaty, but I am very much interested in what was happening there. And when I was looking at doing stories and covering that issue from Noida, Delhi, where I am based, there was not even a single story. I mean, there were not hardly any stories in mainstream media. At least I could not find much on, like, what is global plastic trade? What is every country's stand? If I want to read as a general audience, what is the stand every country is taking? So these are the ways you can actually simplify this all complex topics for the audience. And then for print, you can look at it differently. What is the overall picture? What is the big thing that you want to tell the people? So yeah.
Thank you, Zonal. I think I have one question. Now that you told me, I know the target audience right now. You told that's very important, right? And then you told me the derivatives thing, which you couldn't find information about derivatives, right? So that comes next to me. Once I know the audience, what is the structure I should follow for my report? So if you can tell me from your experience, what is the process you follow for researching or structuring your report? If you can tell, that will be helpful for the young journalists.
Okay. See, I think, I just mentioned about the 4 W's and 1 H. I think that is fundamental. But having said that, like one of the things my editor always says is, why now? Why are you doing the story now? And that has to come right up front. So that is the number one thing. As a journalist, like one of the mistakes I made early in my career was a lot of times when I was doing a story on a complex topic as this, I would myself get so entangled in all the jargon. Like there's a lot of jargon in these topics, right? But as a journalist, then I don't have to get entangled in that. I have to simplify it for my reader, right? That is my duty. That is where my expertise comes in. So I think the first most important thing is you have to read. That is number one. Even before you talk to people, you have to read absolutely every literature that is there, even if it's academic journals. So you understand your topic. After that, when you talk to the person, you get more clarity on what it is all about. After which you will have then a much clearer idea of what is going on. What is it you want to say in the story? And then, like a very basic thing of why you're doing the story now, what it means, how it impacts, what are the solutions. So then the structure just falls in the place if your one fundamental thing is clear is what is your news peg, which we say in the newsroom, like what is your peg? Why now? In fact, a lot of times, in fact, this is something that I've learned from an editor here is when we write a story brief here, so one is the introduction part, one is what we are writing in the story. And the most important part that he always looks at is why now? Why I'm proposing this story at this point of time. And this is a question that we always have to ask ourselves every single day before writing a story, because that will then tell you that, what you need to include in the story. Yeah.
So can you also share any examples of any impactful reports on this, whether it's on GPT or I think GPT, there are hardly any articles actually. So any examples on impact of these print reports on environmental policies? Any structure you saw? This is
You
very
all are
impactful.
the audience. So I think that is something you have to tell me. What were the stories you found useful? That is actually something that has to come from all of you.
So participants, that's where your chat you can use.
Yes.
You can share with us
Yes.
any stories which found impacting and why. You can tell us in the chat. It's open for you.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So now that you told the structure, right? So and now they say data is a new fuel. Everywhere there is data for everything.
Correct.
So
Correct.
how you make sure that there is data accuracy and credibility when I'm presenting this statistics in print and reports?
Yeah. Okay. So see, data actually is the most critical thing. I just cannot emphasize its importance enough, because that actually is the strong base on which you base your stories and your argument. And that is, and it is this data that will, ensure that no one is able to question the facts you are posing in the story. And that is why, as a journalist, it is absolutely critical to learn, how to read government data on environment. And that is where a lot of not-for-profit organizations, social enterprises who are working in the issue, they help. I mean, and see, we are journalists, right? We are reporters. So a lot of times there are topics that we don't know. We also don't understand that data as well, right? And in fact, a lot of times the data is also one data you will find in some other website. The other data it will be hidden in some third website, which is absolutely unrelated website. And you have to put it all together to make sense of it, right? So that is where, in fact, a lot of social impact organization, not-for-profits, help and to help you get in depth into what all data is available. But you yourself, as you start working with their assistance, and as you also read, you just start picking up those facts, and you then know what are the places, what to look out for. It just takes some time, but once you get the hang of it, then it just makes it very easier, because the moment there is a new data that is published, it's a new story for you. But having said that, while data is so important, is because, number one, what I also mentioned, no one can question, the validity of your argument and the facts you're presenting in the story, which is absolutely critical in today's time. And more than that, it is also important because it just gives the reader a snapshot. Like at one glance, you know what the story is about. Vamsi, there was this data visual thing that I had shared with you earlier, right?
Yes, I'm just sharing the screen.
So I'll just share, I'll just talk about that example that I had shared earlier with Vamsi Viz. So this is not from a plastic story. This is about this story we had done in December, which was about how people are not buying. Okay. So our argument for this cover story of India Today was that the middle class does not have disposable income in their hands, or it is very less, and they're not buying cars, they're not buying houses. So how do we prove it? So while it was a 10-page story, but what we did was, in this almost like a double spread, what you are seeing on screen right now, we identified the top sectors like FMCG, food. People are not spending on food. They're not buying houses. So, and now if you look at this one chart, you have a top view of everything that is happening. That they're not buying refrigerators, they're not buying mobile phones. And it's also very interesting because now when you look at the graphs, you see in every sector, you look at how the premium segment, the rich are getting richer and they're buying more. The high-end products are all being sold, but the low-end version, their low-end versions, the basic versions, people are not buying that. So essentially, there is a middle class squeeze. The people in the middle class, lower middle class, they're not able to buy goods that they would normally, and this is then the power of infographics in a story, and more so in a print story. Because they then create that pull factor to Europe to read, because it's not many people today want to, don't want to read 2,000-word pieces.
Yes. So that gets to my next question. While data is there, and now the sources of the data, which tells the credibility, and also what are the common mistakes some people can do in sourcing this data? And also, are there any ethical considerations I should keep in mind when I am quoting sources or getting this data? Some things which I have to keep in mind.
See, one is obviously the credibility of the organization. If it is government data, you yourself have to learn and cross-check. I mean, it should not happen that just because some organization has given it to you and you copy-paste it. It is absolutely critical that you yourself learn so you're able to cross-check it from the source. So that is number one. because it is ultimately your story, it is your byline. You are responsible for every single word, every single number that is there in the story. And I think as journalists, we are very accountable. Everything is there in the public domain. So these are the things then that big, and especially if you're doing a negative story, you have to be absolutely critical. And that is why you have to know every word that you're writing about, right? And more than that, when it comes to sources, obviously, as a journalist, after as experience, you just get a sense of people, the organizations which are credible, which are not. So I think a lot of times it is also critical to look at the organizations which have some credibility in that space and source data from there. Like, for example, I'll tell you, just say if I'm as a business journalist, right? So I will not, if I'm doing a story, and I would rather actually go for data from a third party rather than I look. So, for example, a lot has been said about plastic. So I'll speak more from, general story perspective. So, for example, if you're doing let's say, a e-commerce story, right? So, but rather than getting data on e-commerce, on the market data on e-commerce from an e-commerce company, it is much better to get a data from a third party, because then that has a much higher chances of not being biased, right? Because that way, then there's no conflict of interest. But if I am getting data from a company that is having products in the same space, then there's a very strong conflict of interest, and that is why. So that is one thing, that you have to have these kind of checks in place. But it comes with experience, usually. But yeah, so that is about it. And there's a lot of data in India, in fact, in public domain. A lot of it is actually, the problem also is a lot of times is not updated as frequently. But we have to do what we have to do.
So, next question, which is
Mm.
important from my personal because we also do a lot of local work, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
do you think for an work on global plastic treaty, do you think local case studies and personal narratives will enhance or have an impact on this negotiation per se? If you
See,
think.
absolutely. See, so when do I want to read a story? The moment I know it impacts me. It impacts me, my body, my house, my family, right? That is the number one reason that why one would actually be very interested in a topic like this, right? And so, for example, otherwise, a lot of times we think that climate change is happening in some outside world. It is not impacting us, right? That is usually how a human mind works, right? We want to deny everything that is negative, right? So how do you bring it closer to home? That is through personalization. That is through these stories. That is through how people who have been impacted by, for example, if I'm doing a story on plastic, I would rather want to, like, in fact, when I was doing a story on plastic, I actually even spoke to veterinary doctors, on how they see, because, like, for example, cows, like this veterinary told me that he found 50 kgs worth of plastic bags in a cow's stomach, and this is very common for them. I spoke to a doctor, like I spoke to doctors at AIMS and all these other hospitals on how they are seeing the impact of plastic on health, right? And in fact, see, while there's a lot of data today that microplastics are there in your brain, they are in your body, they are in your testicles and breast milk and all these, even stomach, and even, in fact, fetus, which is that organ in the body which is there in the body for just like 7-8 months. So if it is there in an organ that is just so new in the body, think how much plastic is there in the other organs, right? So how do you bring topics like this home? Because you it is happening in some other world. It is not happening here, right? So you then have to identify examples, people who have got affected by it, to actually create an impact. And finding those people, I can tell you, is extremely difficult. It is very difficult for people to find such people, because how do you do that, right? But that is where it will create the most impact in your story.
So now that we know, we have you told us how these articles or the can be accessible to general public. Do you think we should follow a separate technique or process to reach these articles, important articles, or work which journalists do, to policymakers? Is there any separate route they should follow if reaching the policy? I know you told me that you should know your target audience. First, you told that. But if my target audience is policymakers, is there separate strategy I should follow, or is there any tips you can give to them if it's for policymakers?
See, usually, I mean, you can, if you want a story to be read by a specific person, you can obviously send it to them for sure, directly. The other thing also is what I actually do personally, and I know a lot of journalists do, is that we are very active on social media platforms. Like, for example, I know journalists who cover a lot of government are very active on Twitter, like who cover startups. Again, X now, x.com. I mean, that's a very strong platform to reach your network. And a lot of times, because we are speaking to policymakers, we are speaking to, the people that we are covering, and we usually have those people in our network on social media, right? I post there. So, I mean, that is one way. And obviously, all organizations usually, they also have the very wide reach, and they will obviously post all the stories on social media. Like, for example, when we do a story, even if it is in print, the video team will make a video out of it, and we will give some bites to it as well. So I think this is again, see, distribution today has to happen can happen in very different formats, right? A print story can also go in TV. It can also go in a video format, in a reel format, right? In a on Instagram, and that is what we also do. So Vamsi, while reaching to the policymakers, I think is one of the ways that has to have that effort,
Yes.
as for a journalist, where you have to go out of the way, right? And especially if, like, for example, if I'm doing a story on like Trump tariffs, which is a very hot topic right now, I would want it to be read by certain people, but they're also the people that I've taken inputs from, right, in the story. Like, because a lot of times, like, if I'm doing a story on plastic, I will speak to the environment ministry. So if I have spoken to those issues, I will share the story. And this is actually a matter of SOP as a journalist, that you also share your stories with the people that you have spoken about, who have helped you understand the story, put it together.
Oh, one last question, Sonal.
Yes,
Based on
please.
time. Okay. So how do you see the future of environmental journalism right now, and where should students focus? Because you see lot of our participants are the last stage journalists. So any tips for them where they should focus? What do you think of it?
I mean, there are 100 students in this chat on a festival day. So I do think the future of environmental journalism is very bright, of course. In fact, I myself attended a workshop, a 3-day workshop on environment. I mean, because see, as journalists, we also need to upgrade our skills and learn. There's just so many topics within environment, right? Like soil health, there is climate change, there is chemical pollution, and these are just so niche topics in itself, right? So, I mean, there again, there were 100-odd journalists who had actually taken out time from their, and let me tell you, our journalist life is very busy. You'll always be busy. There'll always be a deadline. So you just have to live with that. So you have to, so I mean, there were 100 journalists, or like around 90 journalists, who had taken out time, despite having those deadlines, to come there and do that 4-day residential course. And here again, I see over 100 people who are, listening to this workshop for over 2 hours. So yes, obviously, I do think the future is very bright.
Thank you. So now that you told it's 2 hours, I would request everyone just give me 10 minutes more so that we'll finish this. So we will take a few questions now for 5 minutes, another 3 minutes, sorry. So there is one question from Miss
Yeah.
Mamta Vaishnavi to you, Sonu. To write in-depth stories, how do you manage munching on data? Any suggestions to simplify the technical terms?
Yeah, so see, I think you are able to simplify a technical term is only when you understand it yourself properly. Only then you can write it in a manner which is accessible for the audience. If you yourself have even one doubt, it will come across. I can promise you the reader will not understand it. So that is the most important. You yourself have to really know exactly what it is about. Only then you can simplify a topic. So that is number one. What was the other thing that she asked?
To simplify technical terms, you told how do you manage to munching on large sets of data? If there is so much of data, is there any techniques you follow to simplify the data?
See, again, you have to ask yourself what is most important. Because, like, so for example, if you look at a print story, and this is in fact a question that comes to me every time. In fact, as a journalist, sometimes you are just so much passionate about a story that you want to tell the audience everything. You want to tell the readers everything. Oh, this is important. This is important. But the reader probably is not interested. So, and you can't also overwhelm them with all this information. So you all, and also, like, for example, in a magazine, you have this limited real estate, right? So you have to think, what are the top 5 things they need to know? Simple, right? And then because you understand the topic, you know exactly how do you then, you have your own trajectory, then you make on what is the most important, what is it then they need to know. So that helps. So these very basic questions you have to keep asking yourself. Who are you writing for? What is the most important thing? And every time you're writing a story, every paragraph you have to ask, is this relevant? Can I say this in a shorter way? So these are the things then that over time, then it becomes a practice.
So there is another question from Mr. Prithvi, but I think you have answered it, Sonal.
Okay.
How can we substantiate our view short and crisp in data analysis across news beats? I think you will,
Yes.
what I want to present, you should have clarity what present, and then accordingly get down and do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't have any more questions. Sonal, definitely we will. If there are any questions, they will write to us and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much. It was insightful from your sharing your experience, 15 years of experience, and in 20 minutes, obviously we can't take everything from you, but we will definitely, if there are any questions, we'll forward it to you. And thank you so much for sharing the experiences.
Thanks a lot, Vamsi, for having me here. It was a pleasure, and I hope the students found it worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonal, once again.
Yeah, pleasure.
So,
have a good day.
Thank you, Sonal. It has been insightful, and we deep dived into the world of plastics, policies, and powerful storytelling. So we came to know different tools and different techniques that we can follow, right? And if there is one thing we learn is that the reporting on Global Plastic Treaty is not just about covering any other environmental issue. It's about shaping the conversation on one of the biggest crises of our time, which is the plastic pollution. So if I could summarize from different speakers, one thing which we came to know is like plastics are everywhere, but so is opportunity to tell better stories for all of you, whether it's about policy loopholes or whether it's corporate accountability or whether it's the impact of that plastic pollution on humans. Your role is to connect these dots for and and we also talked about how the facts matter, which is the data again. So while the facts matter, it is also important how do we frame them, because that's the right storytelling approach that can turn a complex treaty into a relatable and compelling news piece for the general public or for the policymakers. And one thing which is also highlighted during this workshop is also collaboration, as Sonal really pointed out, right? You speak with different people, which is scientists, policymakers, or communities to work together to ensure that right narratives reach the public. And keep one thing which you have to remember is your work has impact, because a single well-researched story can push policymakers to act, change the public perception, and create meaningful change. So never underestimate the power of your pen. or for example, keyboard in this case, because right now we are mostly digital right now. As we sign off, I will leave you with one important question, which is you have gained a little bit of knowledge from this workshop, right? So what you're going to do with this? Will you dig deeper into how India is negotiating global plastic treaty, or will you challenge the misleading claims about plastic solution, or will you highlight the voices of the most affected by the plastic pollution? So these are some of the questions or areas which you can work into. And to do that, what we can also do is we can help you with some of the resources for that, where you can join the India Youth Collective, and you can also sign for our Plastic Treaty newsletter. And you can also join there is Asia Pacific, Gaia Asia Pacific Journalist Network. And then we also have a guide for journalists on reporting on greenwashing and false solution. So after this workshop, we will send you an email with the recording and the sources for all the call to action items which I told, whether it is joining the youth collective or joining the journalist network, resources related to global plastic treaty or any other GPT courses, and any other sources for reporting on greenwashing and false solution. And if I have one request for you, most importantly, don't let this conversation end here. We'd love to hear about your work. You can tag us. Our social media handles will be shared here. Share your articles and keep this momentum alive. We need more reporting on this global plastic treaty. I hope each one of you will be able to do that and make sure that we have that tackles the plastic pollution from the source, which is curbing the production, getting into reuse models, and making have a just transition where all the informal waste pickers are included in the system. Once again, thank you for all being part of this and go out there and make an impact with your reporting. And also, without thanking my speakers, it will not be end of it. A big thank you to my speakers, Mr. Jacob, Ms. Smita, and Ms. Sonal, for their valuable insights. And I would also like to thank my team behind the scenes for making this workshop possible. So thank you so much, and have a nice evening, all of you.